Have you ever sat outside and enjoyed the peace and quiet of the outdoors? Yeah, forget that. This is Strasburg number 90, an active steam locomotive. And this is not. This steam locomotive sits quietly, waiting for the chance to steam again. But that time will most likely never come. But what is the story of 3750, and how did it end up in such a poor state? But first, let's talk about the property she sits on. Just across the street from the Strasburg Railroad sits a yard full of almost abandoned locomotives. Many are waiting their turn to be cosmetically restored, but with no room left inside the museum and being exposed to the elements, these locomotives may not be so lucky. This is the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, home to many historic locomotives. But, in my opinion, the most impressive of them all sits out in the cold and the rain. Built in 1920, this flagship locomotive is Pennsylvania Railroad 3750, a Class K4 steam locomotive, with a 462 or Pacific wheel arrangement balancing both traction and power for its size. I'm actually lucky enough to own a model of her. The Pennsylvania Railroad experimented extensively with its K4 fleet, trying out streamlining, poppet valves, smoke deflectors, driving wheel types, and others. A number of K4 locomotives had streamlining applied over the years to varying degrees. All were later removed, restoring the locomotives to their original appearance. After World War II, the K4 class was modernized and many performance and visual upgrades were added. Over her career, she was used to pull many trains, including the Pennsylvania Railroad's most prestigious, the Broadway Limited, a non-stop overnight express from New York to Chicago. 3750 was paraded at the World's Fair and pulled Warren G. Harding's presidential train, and subsequently, his funeral train. As locomotives were being withdrawn from service and scrapped by the masses, many feared that examples of the K4 class would not be saved, and 3750 was very close to a scrapyard. It seemed like the end of the line for our K4 as it was going to be scrapped and forgotten like most of railroad history. Oh wait, never mind, it got saved. While another K4, 1361, got to enjoy a life of excursion runs, 3750 would be put into storage. As it would turn out, a former chief of motive power at the Pennsylvania Railroad planned to save locomotive 1737, the first K4 ever built. But this locomotive, being built a few years before 3750, had deteriorated beyond the liking of the railroad and another member of the class was chosen. It's ironic to think that the demise of one locomotive gave another a second chance to shine. All preserved locomotives were moved to a roundhouse in Northumberland, Pennsylvania, where they sat for a while as more locomotives were added to storage. Later, in 1975, all of the locomotives stored in Northumberland were moved to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. What's left of the Northumberland roundhouse is now completely overgrown and almost invisible. A few years went by and the Pennsylvania Railroad's collection still sat in an outdoor yard, collecting dirt and rusting away. By this time, Penn Central had been formed and now owned the collection of locomotives at Strasburg. And Penn Central, with their infinite money, decided it would be a good idea to scrap the steam locomotives for some quick cash. Real smart. It should have been obvious that at this point they could not dig themselves out of their own grave, but Penn Central went ahead and approved the project. Once rail fans caught wind of this from Penn Central employees, many began to cry wolf, and rightfully so. These were the last of the engines from the standard railroad of the world and deserved to be saved. The feud between railfans and Penn Central ended with the Pennsylvania legislative intervening. They struck a deal with Penn Central and forgave some back taxes in exchange for Penn Central deeding the collection to the state. The collection still resides at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania today, and in 1987 the two remaining K4s, 1361 and our 3750, were made official state steam locomotives. Now you may recall that I said 3750 was sitting outside of the museum, and has been for almost 50 years. Now, there have been many plans in recent history to build a roundhouse at the museum to store many of the locomotives on outdoor display, and volunteers in the museum have also made plans to at least cosmetically restore the engine once this roundhouse was built, but with a $5 million price tag, the project has been hit with roadblocks at every turn. Until progress is made, our girl 3750 will continue to remain outside. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember, history never repeats itself, but it does often rhyme. Subscribe for more.